On the morning of the 11th of February 1895, a black woman of 63 years saddled a Missouri mule named Moses in the freight yard behind the Cascade post office in Cascade County, Montana, at 4 hours and 20 minutes before sunrise, and the thermometer nailed to the post office door read -18 degrees Fahrenheit. The woman wore 2 revolvers, one heavier than the other, both worn handle forward in the cavalry style. She wore a man's brimmed hat over a headcloth folded twice. Her right knee, which she had wrenched in the previous December against a fence rail near the Birch Coulee, would not bend past about 30 degrees and had not been doing so for 61 days. She did not favor it visibly. She had learned, in a girlhood I will return to, not to favor anything that an onlooker could use. Her name was Mary Fields, although the Cascade Weekly, the Great Falls Tribune, which had begun publishing in '84, and the postal logs in Helena would all call her Stagecoach Mary by the end of the year. She had been born into slavery in Hickman County, Tennessee, in or about the year 1832. The year escapes precise documentation. The slave manifests of the lower Tennessee farms in the early 30s are thin and were maintained for tax purposes, not for the convenience of historians, and she had been freed in her 13th or 14th year by the emancipation that reached her county late. I should say at the outset that this is not the version of the story you have read elsewhere. In the dime novel version, and in most retellings I have seen since, Mary Fields is the toughest woman of the American frontier, a woman who feared nothing and held the route open by force of will. Some of that is true. Most of it is wrong in a way that matters. Her toughness was not the toughness of the man who has nothing to lose. It was the toughness of a woman who had been taught, at 6 years old, in a Tennessee snowstorm by her own enslaved mother, how to keep moving when fear told you to stop. I will come to the Tennessee snowstorm in its proper place. For now you should know only that on the morning of the 11th of February, 1895, Mary Fields was carrying the United States mail to St. Peter's Mission, about 10 miles to the west-northwest of Cascade, by the wagon road as it then ran, on the second-day rotation of a star route she had held by contract for some time, and she was a woman who knew exactly what could happen to her on that road, and who went anyway. The post office door opened behind her. The postmaster, whose name was Otis Brennan, and who had held the appointment since '89 and who did not like her, came out without a coat and with the mailbag held by its top straps as one carries a dead rabbit. "Sign here, Mary," he said. She did not turn. She tightened the second strap of the saddle. Moses, who knew her hands and would stand under almost any condition for them, stood. "I cannot accept this delivery to an uncredentialed carrier," Brennan said, loud enough for the 2 clerks behind the office window to hear. He repeated this phrase, with very slight variation, twice a week, and he had repeated it in front of varying audiences for the entire 2 years of her contract. The contract had been signed in Helena by an inspector who had not asked Brennan's opinion. Brennan had never made his peace with this. "I'll need someone credentialed to witness." "There is no one credentialed at 4 in the morning, Mr. Brennan," Mary said. She turned. Her face, in the light of the lantern hung on the post office wall, was set in the particular composure she wore when she was being asked to lose her temper for someone else's amusement. "The 2 boys at the window are not credentialed. You are the credential. You hand me the bag. I sign for it. I ride." "You'll get 6 miles, Brennan said. He was watching her knee. He knew about the knee. Everyone in Cascade knew about the knee. "Maybe 7 with that leg." "All of them," Mary said. She took the bag with her left hand. She produced a stub of pencil from the inner pocket of her coat with her right, signed the receipt against the doorframe in a small, careful script which Mother Amadeus Dunn had taught her to form in the back kitchen of the Ursuline Convent Academy in Toledo, Ohio, in the autumn of 1880, and she handed the receipt back to Brennan without looking at him. She had learned the script after she was 48. Inside the mailbag, and this matters for what follows, were 9 ordinary letters, 2 small commercial parcels from a Helena haberdasher, a folded copy of the Boston Pilot for the Mission's library, and 1 parcel I will describe in the next part of this account, sealed in brown butcher's paper and twine, addressed in a hand I have studied and which I recognized the first time I held the wrapping in my own hands at the St. Peter's Mission Archive, before I had read a word of the letters around it. The hand was that of Sister Mary Helena of the Boston Convent of Mercy on Tremont Street. The parcel was for Mother Mary Amadeus Dunn, Mother Superior of St. Peter's. It weighed a little more than 3 ounces. Mary Fields did not open it. She placed it, on this particular morning, in the inner pocket of her coat rather than in the bag, not because she suspected its contents, but because Mother Amadeus had once, in '88, lost a letter from her own sister out of a torn bag in a December snow, and Mary had decided, as she did with a great many quiet things, that this would not happen again on her route. Across the freight yard, in the doorway of the livery, a man named Michael Sullivan was watching. Sullivan was 38 years old, a freight teamster who ran the Great Falls Helena ore line 3 days a week, and who had grown up outside Bandon, Cork, and crossed in '73. He had not, in 2 years of seeing Mary Fields at 4 in the morning, said more than a sentence to her at a time. He had reshod her mule Moses in the small hours of that morning, without payment and without leaving a note, because he had noticed 2 days before that the left rear shoe was loose, and Mary had been carrying a bad knee and would not have wanted, in his judgment, to crouch to check it in the cold. He did not approach her now. He watched her mount the mule, settle the mailbag across the pommel, touch the brim of her hat to nothing in particular, and ride out of the freight yard onto the road north. He went back into the livery. He drank coffee from a tin cup. He did not say what he had done. I have stood in the Cascade freight yard. The buildings are gone. The post office burned in 1911, but the cobbles of the yard are still there under a half-inch of asphalt, and on a cold February morning, the angle of the streetlight through the cottonwoods falls almost exactly where the lantern in 1895 would have fallen. I have stood at the spot Brennan stood. It is colder there than 3 feet to the left, because the wind off the river turns the corner of the old post office foundation. It is the kind of detail you cannot get from the documents. Mary Fields would have known it. She would have made Brennan come out further than was comfortable. She did not, in any account I have read, give him the small mercy of her own discomfort. She rode north on the Mission Road at 4 hours and 40 minutes before sunrise, and inside of an hour, Otis Brennan opened his office to a second visitor, who had ridden in from the Drennan Ranch 6 miles east on a horse he was prepared to lose. The visitor was Hiram Drennan, 55, owner of 3,000 head between the Sun River and the Smith, owner of the largest single landholding in the county outside the railroad reserve. He was a cattleman of the second wave who had come up from Texas in '78, and he had been trying since the previous September to buy the Star Route contract out from under Mary Fields and into a holding company in his own name. He had not yet succeeded because the Helena postal inspector who had signed the contract was, by the assessment of every person who knew him, not for sale. "Brennan," Drennan said. He took off his gloves. He did not take off his hat. The 2 clerks at the window made themselves smaller. "She's out, she's out." "Storm coming," Drennan said. "Telegraph from Great Falls last night. They've got a wall of it off the belt." "I know about the storm, 10 miles in this." 63 years old, a bad knee. Brennan said nothing. He had thought briefly about saying what he was thinking, which was that he had told her about the storm, and that he had not told her about the wall of it off the belt range that was supposed to break by mid-morning. He decided not to say it. "If she does not arrive," Drennan said carefully, "the route is in default." "It is. And the contract has to be reassigned in 72 hours. "It does. To whoever the inspector accepts." "To whoever the inspector accepts." Drennan put his gloves back on. He smiled at the 2 clerks and did not mean any of it. "You'll let me know. I'll let you know. I have a copy of the contract." The clause that governs default reads, in the longhand of the original, "In case of failure to deliver within the contracted period, save for cause documented in writing and signed at point of departure." Brennan had not offered Mary Fields documented cause. Mary Fields had not asked for it. She had ridden out at -18 degrees, with a wall of weather off the belt range she did not know was coming, on a route that the road book gave at 10 miles, and which in this weather would be longer than that, with a knee that would not bend past 30 degrees, because the United States mail had been entrusted to her hand by signature in Helena, and because she had never, in the time she had held the route, signed for cause. She was at this moment 2 miles north of Cascade, on a stretch of road which crosses an open flat called Bensonville, and the first snow of what would become the worst 3 days of weather. Cascade County saw that winter was starting to fall sideways, out of a sky that, half an hour earlier, had been clear of cloud entirely. She did not turn back. If you came here for stories of women whose names the 19th century recorded only when it could not afford not to, the small button beneath this video keeps them coming. That is all I will ask of you. I will not ask it again. She did not turn back, but she did, at mile 3, slow Moses to a walk and put her gloved hand inside the inner pocket of her coat to confirm that the Boston Parcel was still flat against her ribs. She had worn the coat for 9 winters. The lining of the inner pocket had thinned in the lower seam, near the kidney. She had been meaning to ask the mission seamstress to put a patch there, and had not, because it had not yet failed. The parcel was there. I will say now what is in the parcel, although Mary Fields will not open it for another 40 hours. Inside the brown butcher's paper, wrapped in a second sheet of waxed waterproof tissue, of the kind Boston convents used for postal-bound documents, was a single folded letter on the stationery of the Mother House of the Sisters of Mercy on Tremont Street. The letter ran to 4 pages, in the close hand of Sister Mary Helena, secretary to the Mother House, and it informed Mother Mary Amadeus Dunn, in language as careful as Mother Mary Helena could make it, that Mother Amadeus's own mother, Ellen Dunn, born Toole, of Sandusky County, Ohio, 68 years old, widowed in 79, was dying of consumption in a Toledo boarding house, that the parish doctor put the term at 2 weeks at the outside, and that Ellen had asked, on the previous Sunday, after her daughter. Mother Amadeus had not seen her mother for many years. She had not seen Toledo since 1884, when she had crossed the country with a small party of Ursulines to take up the work at St. Peter's. There would be no time, even by the Northern Pacific, for her to reach Toledo before the term. The parcel in Mary Fields's coat pocket weighed 3 ounces and contained one of the most consequential pieces of information that would arrive in northern Montana that winter, and Mary Fields, who had not been told what was in it and would not be told for another 40 hours, was carrying it through a snowstorm she did not yet know would last 3 days. By mile 5, the wind had turned. The road bent east around a granite outcrop the freighters called the Anvil. Mary could no longer see the post office tower in Cascade behind her. She could no longer see the Mission Road sign ahead of her. The snow had gone from sideways to horizontal. Her right glove, the one she had worn against the wrenched knee through the worst of December, was beginning to lose feeling at the 3rd finger. At about the halfway point, the right side of her face was numb from cheekbone to jaw. A little past that, she saw, ahead and slightly off the road to the east, a low building she had seen perhaps a dozen times in the previous 2 years and had never had reason to enter. It was a Great Northern Railway section camp, a single converted caboose set on cut blocks at the edge of a coulee, used by the spring track crews and never, to Mary Fields's knowledge, in February. From the iron pipe at the roof, a thin pencil line of grey smoke rose 6 feet, bent west by the wind and disappeared. Mary Fields stopped Moses on the road. She looked at the caboose for the time it took to draw 3 breaths against a frozen scarf. Her knee, which had begun to lock somewhere along the last mile, was making a sound that was not a sound. It was a pressure against the inside of the kneecap on every step Moses took. She turned Moses east, off the Mission Road, toward the smoke. The inside of the caboose was 16 feet long and 7.5 wide, lit by one coal oil lantern hung from a bent nail in the ceiling, and warm in the small way that a sheet metal stove in a tin-walled room is warm in a Montana February. That is, hot at the center and useless at the corners. Mary Fields stepped over the threshold with her left foot first, the way she had been taught at 6 years old to cross a threshold she did not know, and she pulled the door shut against the wind with a movement of her shoulder that her right knee would not have permitted from any other angle. She did not, in the first 3 seconds, see the family. She saw the stove. She saw a man's coat hung from a peg. She saw a wooden chest pushed against the far wall. She saw on the chest a copper kettle. Then a child, sitting on the floor against the chest, with a striped blanket over her shoulders and a wooden horse in her hand, made a small noise, and the woman who had been crouched on the lower bunk lifted her head. The woman was perhaps 28. She was wearing a dark woolen dress that had been good once and was no longer, and a knitted shawl that had been white before it had been used for many things. Her hair was the colour of new straw and was pinned back without grace. Her eyes were grey.
She had been holding a baby.
Under a year, Mary judged, perhaps 9 months, against her shoulder, and the baby was breathing through its mouth, and the breathing made a sound that Mary Fields had heard before, in Toledo, in '82, in a winter ward. Behind the woman, on the floor between the bunks, a boy of about 6 was asleep under a buffalo robe with the iron stove between him and the door. He did not stir at the cold air. "Madam," Mary said. The woman stood up. She was a head shorter than Mary. She kept the baby against her shoulder. She did not speak. "I am the postal carrier on this route," Mary said. She spoke slowly because she had learned to recognize faces that did not have English. "My name is Mary Fields. I serve the United States Mail to St. Peter's Mission. I have stopped because of the weather." "Mary Fields," the woman repeated, careful, in a register Mary had not heard since Toledo. I am Inga Sletton. My husband, Anders, he is at the wood." She nodded at the stove. "He goes out for the wood." "How long have you been here?" 3 days. Inga shifted the baby. "We come from Cascade, from the train. The train, it leaves us. There is no other train to Great Falls until next week." She had explained in not quite 40 words a situation Mary Fields had been piecing together for 60 seconds. The Sletton family, Anders and Inga and 3 children, had ridden a Great Northern emigrant car as far as Cascade, where they had been intended to transfer to a freight wagon for Great Falls. There was no wagon. The agent had told them, with the particular kindness of agents who are out of options, that there would be no wagon for a week. The section camp at Birch Coulee was empty in February. There was a stove. The Slettons had walked out, the 4 of them, with their 2 trunks and their 3 small children, the previous Friday afternoon. They had been there 6 days. They had a half barrel of flour. They had no doctor. The baby, whose name was Ola, had begun on the 2nd night to breathe in the way Mary was hearing now. The door behind Mary opened. A man came in with an armload of split spruce and the kind of full snow on his coat that suggested he had been outside for longer than the wood required. He stopped when he saw Mary. He stopped fully. He did not put down the wood. "Anders," Inga said. "It is a carrier from the post." Anders Sletton was 35. He had the face of a man who had been to sea before he had been to land. He set the wood down by the stove with the courtesy of a man who has been raised to set wood down quietly, even when his hands are shaking, and he turned to Mary and removed his cap. He did not, Mary noticed, look at her 2 revolvers. "You will sit," he said. His English was better than his wife's, but it had been learned in a shipyard rather than a school. "You will warm yourself. You are most welcome." "I cannot stop long," Mary said. "I have the mail. The storm. I know about the storm." She did sit, however, on the bench by the stove. She did unbutton her coat. She did, with her left hand, untie the bandana that had frozen against her cheek. The right knee, under the trousers she had worn under her riding skirt for the last 6 winters, was the colour of plums. Inga shifted the baby again. The baby made the sound. Mary, watching, knew what the sound was. The sound was the 2nd stage of what the convent infirmary in Toledo had called true croup, and what Mother Amadeus had called diphtheritic croup, and what the doctors in Toledo in '82 had called pseudomembranous croup, and what a child making that sound did in the absence of intervention was die within 36 hours, usually less if the child was under a year and underweight. Mary stood up. "Madam Sletton," she said, "give me the child." Inga looked at her husband. I do not know. I am a postal carrier," Mary said. "I am not a physician. I have stood in a children's ward for one winter, in Toledo, in '82, with a mother superior who was a physician's daughter. I know the sound your child is making. I cannot promise you that I can change it. I can promise you that if you do not give him to me, the sound will continue." Inga gave her the child. I will tell you now, briefly, and only because it is necessary for what comes after, who Mary Fields had been before the morning of the 11th of February, 1895, in the Caboose at Birch Cooley. I will tell you in the form Mary herself used on the one occasion I know of, a conversation in the St. Peter's kitchen on a March evening 4 weeks after this story ends, recorded in Mother Amadeus's daybook in a hand I have read more times than I can remember. "I was born in slavery," Mary had said. "I do not remember my mother's face. I remember her hands. I was 13 when the war reached us. I went north because my mother had told me, before she died, that I should go north. I walked from Tennessee to Ohio. I worked. I came in time to be a housekeeper at the Ursuline Convent Academy in Toledo, in the kitchen of which Mother Mary Amadeus, who was then Sarah Teresa Dunn, was the youngest sister at 26 years of age. She taught me to read in '79 and to write in '80. I followed her west the year after she went because she had asked me. The asking is what I remember. There had been people in my life until that asking who had told me to do things. There had not been a person who had asked." In the caboose, holding the Sletton baby against her shoulder, Mary Fields was the woman who had been asked 10 years before by a Toledo schoolteacher nun to come out to a mountain in Montana, and she was carrying the Toledo schoolteacher nun's letters for a wage of $2 a trip in her 63rd year. She held the baby in the curve of her left arm. With her right hand, she took the kettle off the stove. She poured a little hot water into a tin basin. She tipped in a small dose of cold from the bucket by the door until the water was bath warm. She wetted a square of cotton from a pocket inside her coat. She had carried these squares of cotton through every winter route since '92 in a small oiled paper packet for reasons that had to do with frostbite on her own face and which I will not document further. She held the wet, warm cloth against the baby's throat and chest under his linen shirt. She did not press. She held. "Anders," she said, "boil more water. Keep it just below the steam. Inga, sit by me. Hold the boy's feet." Anders moved. Inga moved. The baby's breathing did not change in the first minute. It did not change in the second. At about the third minute, the high, wet rattle in his chest dropped by what Mary judged to be a quarter of its volume, and Inga, who had not spoken, made a small sound through her nose and put her hand against her own mouth. "Not yet," Mary said. "We are not done. Anders, the door." "The door? Open it for one breath, close it. The cold air is good for him for one breath, not two." Anders opened the door for the length of a slow count of 3. He closed it. The boy on the floor under the buffalo robe stirred, did not wake, settled. The baby, Ole, against Mary's shoulder, drew in a clean inhalation for the first time since she had held him. Outside, the wind was now solid in the way only Montana winter wind is solid. Not gusting but pressing, the whole hand of weather flat against the long side of the caboose. Mary could feel the floor under her boots vibrate with it. I have read the daybook of Mother Mary Amadeus Dunn for the year 1895. The entry for the 11th of February is short. It reads, in the careful diagonal hand Mother Amadeus used when she was tired, "M has not arrived. Storm. I trust her. I have lit a candle in the chapel for the route." That is all the entry says. The candle is recorded in the mission's wax account for the month. half an inch of beeswax, taper grade, charged to the chapel. By midnight in the caboose, the baby was asleep, breathing through his nose. Mary had not yet stood up. Her knee was no longer a colour she would name. The mailbag sat on the bench beside her, unopened. The Boston parcel was still in her coat pocket. It was at about that hour that Mary, who had been thinking very carefully for some time about distances and times and what was possible, took the Boston parcel out of her coat and looked at it. She would have known the hand. She had read enough of Sister Mary Helena's letters at the convent kitchen table for Mother Amadeus to. She would have known the convent paper. She would have known, from the weight, that there were 4 pages inside. She broke the seal. She did not break it without thought. She broke it because she had concluded, after watching the baby Ole breathe through one nostril for 40 minutes, that the family in this caboose were not going to remain in this caboose. That meant a decision. That meant she would need to know what was at the other end of the road. That meant she would need to know what Mother Amadeus needed to know. She read the letter. She read it twice. She folded it back into its tissue. She tied the parcel up again. She put it back in the pocket inside her coat. Inga, who had not slept, was watching her. Bad news? Old news, Mary said, and someone else's news. I should not have read it. She paused. She looked at the lantern. She looked at the buffalo robe on the floor, which was the only buffalo robe in the caboose. She looked at the boy Lars sleeping under it, and at the little girl Britta, who was curled against Inga's feet now, and at the baby Ole on the bench. Madam Sletten, she said, what did you leave Norway for? Inga blinked. The question, in the small, hot room at midnight in a Montana blizzard, was not the question she had expected. My husband's brother, Inga said. He has a farm. In Cascade, north. He write us. He say there is wheat. He say, there is land. We come for land. And your people in Norway? My mother, in Bergen, she is old. I have not heard. 7 months. Mary nodded. She was, I think, although the record does not prove it, making a kind of bargain with herself in the way I have seen people make bargains in old letters. She had read the letter she should not have read. The letter said that Mother Amadeus, whom Mary had served for 15 years, had a mother dying 2,000 miles away whom she would not reach in time. Inga Sletten, whom Mary had served for 2 hours, had a mother 2,000 miles further whom she had not heard from in 7 months and might never hear from again. Both women were owed news. The thing Mary Fields was best at, in her own assessment and in the assessment of every postmaster and every nun and every freighter who had worked with her, was the delivery of letters. She took the buffalo robe off the boy Lars, who did not wake. She refolded it. She set it across her knees and looked at Inga. Madam Sletten, she said, listen carefully. I am going to ask you to do a difficult thing. Your child will not last in this caboose. There is not enough warmth, there is not enough cleanliness, and the storm is not done. St. Peter's Mission is 11 miles northeast. I cannot take all of you. I cannot take the mule the long way. I can take you and the baby through a gulch I know, 6 miles, on foot. Your husband will take the older 2 and walk back to Cascade at first light. Cascade is 8.5 miles south. He can do it. You and I and the baby will go north. We will reach the mission by mid-morning if I am right about the gulch and the river. The gulch? The gulch is harder. The road is impossible by tonight. I have walked the gulch twice in summer. The river is the difficulty. The river will be ice. It is February. The ice will hold. I have made this call before. She had not, in fact, made this call before. She had crossed the river at Bear Gulch twice in her life, and both times in July. What she had done many times, and what she was relying on now, was the trick, which her mother had taught her on the only walk she clearly remembered with her mother, in a December snow in Tennessee in 1838, when Mary was 6 and her mother was carrying her on her hip across 2 miles of cleared field to a cabin where her uncle was dying, of judging the line of cold air across snow by the angle at which the cold pressed against the cheekbone. If the cold pressed evenly, the wind had nowhere left to go and was about to drop. If it pressed harder on one side than the other, the wind was turning, and the worst was not behind. In the caboose, sitting on the bench with the buffalo robe across her knees, Mary felt the cold on the right side of her face press harder than on the left. The wind was turning. The worst was not behind. But it was going to drop. She stood up. The knee made a sound that was a sound this time. Anders, who had been refilling the stove, turned at the sound and lifted his hand as if to catch her. She waved him off. At first light, she said to him, "You walk south. You take the boy and the girl. You walk slowly. You carry the boy when he tires. You stop at the freight yard. You ask for a man named Sullivan, Michael Sullivan. Tell him I sent you. Tell him there is a baby at St. Peter's and a wife. He will see that you are housed and fed. And you? I am going north. The mule? The mule stays here. He will not cross the gulch. He will draw your boy to the freight yard tomorrow at a walk. Ride him. He will not throw your boy. His name is Moses. He answers to it. He does not answer to other names. Mrs. Fields. It is not Mrs. Fields, Mr. Sletton. It is Miss. There is also a possibility I will be wrong about the river. If I am wrong, your wife and your son will die. You should know that. I am asking you to weigh that against what will happen in this caboose if we wait until Friday. Anders Sletton looked at his wife. His wife was nodding. She had been nodding since Mary had said the word north. She had heard, somewhere in her childhood in Bergen, the same lesson Mary had learned in a Tennessee field. The cold pressing harder on one cheek, Mary tightened her coat. She checked the heavier revolver. She checked the lighter. She tucked the buffalo robe around Inga and the baby, and she put her one good arm under Inga's elbow, and she walked to the caboose door. She set her gloved hand on the handle. She pulled the handle down. The snow had stopped falling. The wind was now sweeping it horizontally across the open coulee, in long, pale rivers that ran east. The temperature, by her judgment of the cold against her cheek, had dropped another 5 degrees in the last hour. Above the line of horizontal snow, between two thin tiers in the cloud, she could see the North Star. She set her foot on the step down. The North Star, on the 11th into 12th of February, 1895, at approximately 47 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, in a winter sky over central Montana, would have stood at a measurable altitude of just under 48 degrees above the northern horizon. Mary Fields did not know it in those terms. She had been taught, in 1872, on a hayfield in Toledo, Ohio, by a teamster called Hodge, who had been a Union scout in Tennessee in '63 and who had once or twice mentioned that she reminded him in her bearing of a particular slave woman who had guided his unit across the Stones River, that the angle from horizon to Polaris was very nearly equal to the latitude of the observer, and that this was sufficient navigation for any person who needed to keep north and could see the sky. She could not see the horizon. She could see the star. She held the star with her left eye for a slow count of 6. She turned her body until her left ear pointed at the star. That gave her west. She turned a quarter, knee permitting, to her right. That gave her north. The Bear Gulch trailhead was an opening between two cottonwoods, 600 yards northeast of the caboose, at the foot of a long bench that rose for half a mile before leveling off onto the upper grasslands. Mary could not see the cottonwoods. She walked to them by the angle to the star and by the memory in her right boot of the slope of the field she had crossed once before, in '86, in midsummer, with Mother Amadeus on horseback beside her. Inga Sletton walked behind her in her left footprint, holding the baby Ole inside the buffalo robe against her chest. Mary had told her to do this in 2 sentences. "Walk in my prints. Do not stop walking until I tell you." Inga, who had been a fisherman's daughter in Bergen and who had walked behind men in snow before, did this. The first half mile took them 38 minutes. Mary's knee, in the cold, was performing a trick she had not asked of it. It was bending without bending. It was permitting itself to be loaded and unloaded by the kind of straight-leg gait one acquires on a wooden leg, which Mary did not have, but which she had walked beside long enough in the Ursuline convent in Toledo, where two of the older porters were veterans of Antietam, to imitate. She did not tell Inga about the knee. She did not tell herself about it either. I have stood at the trailhead at Bear Gulch. The cottonwoods are gone, felled in 1906 for railway ties, but the depression in the bench is still there, and a man in the Cascade County Extension Office named Hewitt walked me up the first half-mile of the original trail in May, in a year I will not name because I do not want to embarrass him professionally. He told me, when we stopped at the place where the trail bends east around a ponderosa stump that has been a ponderosa stump since approximately 1922, that he had been told as a boy that this was the bend where the old letter-carrier woman had been seen on a February night in '95. I asked him by whom. He said, by his grandfather. I asked him whether his grandfather had been on the trail that night. He said no. His grandfather had been one of the children sleeping on the floor of the caboose at Birch Coulee. I sat down at the stump for a while. He stood and let me sit. I am not sentimental about this work. I am telling you about the stump because it bears on what comes next. At mile 2 by Mary's count, in the long, low part of the gulch, where the wind dropped behind the bench and the snow lay deep but undrifted, Mary stopped. She stopped not because she needed to. She did, but she had not yet permitted it. But because she had reached the only place on the route at which a person could decently stop. The lightning pine, the freighters called it, although by '95 it was a stump as well, and a stump that would be there in 2000 because of the way lightning fuses ponderosa pitch into a kind of glassy charcoal. Mary touched the stump with her left glove. She turned to Inga. Halfway. Halfway. How is the baby? Inga lifted the corner of the buffalo robe. The baby Ole was asleep. He was breathing through his nose. He is good. How are you? I am walking. Walk. Mary started again. It is necessary at this point in the account that I describe something I have not yet described, although I have alluded to it. I have said that Mary Fields had been taught at 6 years old, in a Tennessee snowstorm, by her own mother, how to keep moving when fear told her to stop. I should now tell you what that lesson was, because Mary Fields herself was, at this moment, 2 miles into Bear Gulch in a Montana blizzard, in her 63rd year, remembering it. I have the lesson from one source. It is the conversation in the St. Peter's kitchen 4 weeks after the night I am describing, the one recorded in Mother Amadeus's daybook. Mother Amadeus had asked Mary, in her careful Toledo way, what she had thought about on the walk through the gulch. Mary had answered, also in her careful Toledo way, I thought about my mother. I had not thought about her in some years. I thought about how she carried me the year I was 6. We were in Hickman County. My uncle was sick. He had a small cabin a long way off. My mother walked there with me on her hip in a December snow. I do not remember why we went. I have thought since then that we went because he was the only person of our family she had who was still living, and that she had concluded he should not die alone. I do not know. I was 6. I remember that my mother walked very slowly. I did not understand then why she walked slowly. I thought she was tired. I have understood since that she walked slowly because she was carrying me, and because the snow was past her knees, and because she needed to put her foot down in exactly the place she had put it down the step before, and that if she had walked at the pace I wanted her to walk, she would have fallen. I remember that she sang. She sang the same song for 2 miles. I do not remember the song. I remember her chest against my ear. I remember that we got there. I remember that my uncle was alive when we got there, and that he was dead by morning. I remember that my mother did not cry. I remember that on the way back she let me walk for a while. She had me hold her hand. She told me one thing on the way back. She told me, when you are afraid, put your foot down in the place you have decided. Do not put it down in the place that the fear has decided. That is what I thought about in the gulch. I thought about her foot. I thought about my own foot. I made my foot put itself down in the place I decided. I thought about her for 2 miles. That is what Mary Fields told Mother Amadeus on a March evening in 1895. That is what the daybook records. I have read the entry 4 times. I have not paraphrased it. It is the longest direct quotation Mother Amadeus ever wrote down from Mary Fields, and Mother Amadeus had been writing down what Mary Fields said for 15 years. At mile 4, Bear Gulch came to the river. The river was the south branch of the Sun, in this stretch perhaps 30 feet wide between low banks, and on the night of the 11th into 12th of February it was frozen across. Mary could tell at a glance by the lack of any vapour rising, but she could not tell from 20 feet back whether it was frozen through. Bear Gulch crossed the south branch at a place the old freighters called the Spit, because the banks pinched in there and a sand spit of gravel ran out into midstream, which meant the river was shallowest at that point, and which meant, Mary had been told once by a Blackfoot teamster named Joseph Bear above, on whose judgment she had relied for 10 years, that the ice was reliably thicker at the Spit than at any other point on the South Branch in winter. The Spit, in February, would carry a 63-year-old woman, a 28-year-old mother, and a 9-month-old infant in a buffalo robe. It would almost certainly carry them. I have stood on the South Branch above the Spit in March. The ice was 8 inches thick that year. In February of a hard winter, the local press for February of '95 reported ice readings of 14 inches at the Sun River Bridge in Great Falls. The ice at the Spit would have been 12 to 15. Mary did not have a way to measure it. She held up her left hand to Inga. Inga stopped. Mary walked the first 10 feet of the ice alone. She walked them slowly. She listened. The ice did not speak. She walked back. She took Inga's elbow with her left hand. She walked Inga across. They reached the north bank in 5 minutes. At mile 6, the gulch let them out onto the upper bench, and Mary saw, for the first time since she had left the caboose, the lights of St. Peter's Mission a mile and a half ahead, low and yellow against the snow, 3 windows lit in the long stone wall of the convent and 1 in the chapel. At about that moment, Mary did not know it then, but she would know it within 2 hours, Michael Sullivan, who had been roused from his livery cot at 10 o'clock the previous evening by a child who had walked in from the freight yard with a story about a black woman who had not come back, had ridden out of Cascade on his best winter horse at 1 o'clock in the morning with a Winchester across the pommel and a second buffalo robe across the back, and was now coming down the upper bench trail from the northwest, on the only line at which a rider could reasonably expect to intersect a walker out of Bear Gulch in this weather. He came on Mary at mile 7, in a low clearing where the ponderosas opened. He did not call out from a distance. He had been raised in a family that did not call out. He swung down 20 feet ahead. He stood beside his horse. He waited for her to see him. Sullivan, Mary. He looked at the buffalo robe in Inga's arms. He looked at Mary's right knee. He looked at her right boot, which had blood in it, run through the gaiter, dark at the lace. You took the gulch. I took the gulch. The river held. The river held. Sullivan did not say what most men would have said. He did not say she should have stopped. He did not say she should not have started. He walked his horse to Inga. He gave Inga his hand. He lifted Inga and the baby into the saddle in one movement that he had practiced, I expect, on his sister's children in Cork in the winter of '72. Mrs. Fields, he said, I will walk you. The mule is at the freight yard. Your husband is at the freight yard, ma'am, to Inga, and the children. They came in at midnight. I sent them to my sister's. The boy ate 2 bowls of stew. The girl ate 1 and asked for another. Inga did not answer. She had her face in the buffalo robe. Sullivan walked Mary's horse. Mary walked. The last mile and a half to the mission took them 1 hour and 11 minutes by Sullivan's pocket watch, which I have also seen in the museum at Great Falls, and which is silver and Irish made and engraved on the inside of the lid with the words M.S. from his mother. They came up to the mission gate at 5 minutes past 7 on the morning of the 12th of February, 1895, in the first thin grey of a sun that would not rise for another 40 minutes. The chapel bell, which Mother Amadeus rang herself in February because the lay porter had a bad ear and would oversleep, rang for lords as they came up the path. Mother Mary Amadeus Dunn, in her 49th year, born in Akron, Ohio in 1846, daughter of Ellen Toole Dunn, who was dying in a Toledo boarding house 2,000 miles to the east, the head of the Ursuline community at St. Peter's Mission since her arrival from Toledo a little over 10 years before, opened the convent door in her habit and her shawl. She had not slept. She had said this much later to a sister who had been awake with her. She had not slept because she had been certain for about 6 hours that Mary Fields was alive, and she had also been certain for the same 6 hours that she might have been mistaken. She looked at Mary. She looked at Inga and the baby. She looked at Sullivan. She did not run. She did not weep. She held the door open with her left hand and put her right hand against the door frame and stood aside for the 4 of them to come in. "Mother, Mary, I have the mail." "You have the mail." Mary took the mail bag off her shoulder. She took the Boston parcel out of the inner pocket of her coat. She put them both in Mother Amadeus's hands. "I read your letter," she said. "Forgive me, I read your letter." Mother Amadeus, who had not slept, who had not eaten, who had not been told what was in the letter, looked down at the parcel. She did not open it then. "Mary," she said, "Mary, your mother is asking for you." The 2 women stood in the doorway of the convent. The sky to the east was, at this minute, beginning to take colour. Behind them, in the chapel, the bell was still ringing for lords. Mother Amadeus put her right hand against Mary's cheek. She held it there. She did not speak. Mary, in the daybook entry I have read more times than I can remember, did not record what she felt. She recorded only the bell. The bell was a B flat, the daybook entry says, in a hand which is not Mother Amadeus's but Mary's own. She had begun writing in the daybook by 95, with Mother Amadeus's permission and at Mother Amadeus's insistence, and it had been a B flat for 10 years, and I had never noticed. 2 hours later, Otis Brennan and Hiram Drennan came up the Mission Road from Cascade on a borrowed sleigh. I will tell you what happened next briefly, because the courtroom and the news of it have been told before, and because what was important happened in the doorway and not in the courtroom. Mother Amadeus, who did not raise her voice, and who had been raised in a household that thought it impolite to raise the voice in any case, came down to the gate to meet them. She did not let them in. She stood on the upper step. She held the door frame behind her with her left hand. "Gentlemen, Mother." Brennan took off his hat. He did not want to. He did. "There is a matter of postal contract that we have ridden out to discuss with you." "There is no matter, Mr. Brennan. The contract was performed." Brennan did not at first understand. Drennan, who had not yet dismounted from the sleigh, did. His face changed. "Mother," Brennan said. "She did not arrive in Cascade by the time required. She arrived at the address of delivery by the time required. The contract specifies delivery to St. Peter's Mission. She delivered the mail at 5 minutes past 7. The contract permits a window of 12 hours. She was inside it by 3. Drennan dismounted slowly. "The route," he said. "The carrier travelled by an unauthorized path. The contract does not specify the path. The contract specifies the mail." Mother Amadeus did not move. The contract was performed. Quod scriptum est, scriptum est. She looked at Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, you will telegraph the postal inspector in Helena. You will telegraph him at noon today. You will tell him that the route was held." "Mother, you will tell him that the route was held by Miss Mary Fields of Cascade."